So what I wanted to, before we go into the panel discussion, just to give you a brief overview of what the proof of concept work actually entails. This is something that we announced the completion of it yesterday, and the purpose of today is to discuss what the implications are, not only on the short term, but also for the industry on a wider context in a longer term setting. Just to give you an overview around the timeline, the Global Leaders Forum began a work on blockchain about a year ago. It was actually agreed exactly a year ago in our previous meeting here in London in October last year. And at that point, Colt and PCCW Global decided to set up an initiative to look at and study the technical feasibility and viability of creating a blockchain settlement environment for the international carrier purposes. For this work, they selected a company called Clear Blockchain Technologies to develop the platform, and understand they will be here in a panel session following this one as well to talk a little bit more about the technical implications of that. In initial stage, it was looking at the historical data. So basically, can we create something like that works on a historical data? And this was announced and demonstrated in Q1 of this year. That work continued then to make it into a live integration. This was still on a bilateral basis between Colt and PCCW Global, and this was completed during Q2, and we announced it at ITW at the time. At that point, it was decided to expand the proof of concept work to include also BT, Orange, Telefonica and Telstra, to study whether this can be successful also in a multilateral context, effectively doing the same work but adding more carriers there, and see whether the platform still proves its viability. So the objectives were for the work that started around Q2 of this year was to prove the scalability to multiple carrier participants. This is absolutely key, and one of the sort of concerns or constraints or points around blockchain in general in terms of can it actually scale to the quantity of data that in a carrier context would be required. This is in relation to also to handle the large scale of data that's involved in that, and also to prove that there is confidentiality and privacy maintained throughout, so that there is no leakage of any kind of a CDR data or anything like that to those outside of the actual settlement. And it's also that whether it can support new types of contracts and new different types of models was part of the study. And the elements of the POC was firstly to create the multi-carrier blockchain, implement the various contract logic that was required, parse and settle the historic and also the daily usage records from carriers, analyze the performance, and then access the benefits from a production implementation. So these were the things that were done. And the findings, just to summarize a couple of here, is the complexity. It involved hundreds of different types of CDR files, different formats, as different carriers have different formats that they operate. There's dozens of different carrier codes involved in that. In terms of scale, over 100 million minutes were processed. Largest connection was over 15 million CDRs between two counterparties. And all of this was still managed to do within a sort of 3-4 minute processing time. Security side of the things, there wasn't any concerns that emerged with regards to a privacy or resiliency of the platform throughout. So that's a bit of an overview in terms of like what was done and what was now completed. And with that, I would like to turn over to our panelists to comment from their perspective of what this means going forward. And what I would first, before going into the sort of actual POC results and so forth, to maybe take a step back and take a little bit more of a strategic view on this. So basically asking the question, why? So maybe to start with Mark, your view, you also chair the Global Leaders Forum as well. You were the the initial party in this. Could you just maybe talk through a sort of from an industry perspective, what's the actual rationale to invest in blockchain now? And then maybe we move to the rest of the panelists to comment on, from your organization's perspective, why did you decide that it was important that you be part of this? But please, Mark.
A few comments, first of all, about the structure and why we're even sitting at this panel. Although Colt and PCCW Global were the initiating parties of the activity, Carl Grivner and myself had agreed from day one that this could only be successful if it would be adopted en masse by the entire industry environment. And so for us to do something, even if we were the first parties, it made absolute sense to be completely transparent about everything that we're doing. And that's the purpose of this panel, first and foremost, is to assure transparency to the industry, to allow anyone to ask questions, to engage, and to be involved. And if we're going to migrate back office structures and improve ourselves and become more efficient as a industry that settles various forms of ICT traffic in an automated fashion with contracts determined and settled amongst one another through code, it's important that we do so collectively. And that's been the purpose of the meetings and the POCs that have been inclusive, the purpose also of the sessions at the Global Leaders Forum to try and assure that we can move forward collectively as an industry body, and the purpose of this session here to expose to the wider industry the activities that have been driven by the carriers that have been involved in the POC, the direction of the GLF in trying to drive it, and to assure that we stay in lockstep with everyone in the wider industry. So that's the basics. To answer your question, I think it's quite clear that the world is moving, certainly the ICT services world is moving to automation. We talked about it on the panel yesterday. And then the trick is, how do we remain relevant as a service provider community by assuring that we could work together in providing that unique value set that maybe other service providers who are focused only on their ecosystems don't get to. And the piece that is so unique about the people sitting in this room is the willingness to create interoperability, ubiquitous interoperability. In order to do that, though, in the next generation platforms of ubiquitous interoperability, it requires that we demand of ourselves to automate through some sort of common interface, which will then allow us to deal with more complicated forms of traffic than we've been dealing with up until now. Multidimensional forms of traffic, whether it be APIs and software-defined networking capabilities, or whether they be transmission of video that leaves one port at 4 megabit and is received at another port at 2 megabit. How do you charge for that on a variant basis? And so on. All of these complexities, when you start to get down to the nuances of device transmission and the various activities, requires complexity, which can really only be dealt with in today's age if you're willing to write code and automate that complexity. And this is the first step in doing so, and I think a logical first step, which the carrier community seems to have embraced. So that was the logic.
Thank you, Mark. Maybe to ask then the panelists themselves, like from your standpoint, from your organization standpoint, you as the leaders made the decision to be part of that. Maybe to open that a little bit, like why do you think now, Louisa, why was it important now to get involved with this?
So from our point of view, there was a couple of driving factors. One is that voice transactions, despite the fact that we all know it's a legacy product, is still fairly manual in terms of how the rating and the billing, and therefore the revenue realisation tends to be quite long. So anything that helps automate that and get us quicker revenue realisation is a good thing. The second part is that we have a large base of capital markets customers that we service who are already looking at this space around blockchain and other emerging technologies. So for us, participating in this proof of concept was a way for us to upskill our organisation around the technology and therefore help look at where we can then better serve our other customers in the space as well. So lots of benefits for us in participating.
Thank you. Eduardo?
Well, to bring something, let's say, new, or that From another aspect, you know, of the thing is that for us was probably the most important thing when we joined this project. Originally, it was a project in the GLF by PCCW and Colt, and we joined. For me, the most important thing was that our people in the wholesale area in Telefonica are going to learn a lot from the project. Okay, so honestly, when we begin with this project, and there are some guys here from Wholesale, I told them, look, take this as that Telefonica is paying you a master or a PhD in blockchain, because one thing is, you know, to read, you know, a paper saying why blockchain is going to help your business, and another thing is to start talking with the guys from Clear. They ask you CDRs. The CDRs haven't got the proper format, so you have to change. You have to go to operations people, and you really start, you know, to live how blockchain will change your company inside out. So for me, probably the most important, or let's say the basic thing why we joined this was to learn about this. So honestly, one thing, you know, following Mark's words, I honestly encourage you, if you can, you know, to join this whole thing, you know, this blockchain initiative, because we have learned a lot, and now we can see that really it's going to bring us real efficiencies that, you know, and that in the voice business we need it very, very much.
Thank you. Damien from BT's?
Yeah, so from BT's perspective, this is really about process automation and reducing complexity in the way that carriers work with one another on the legacy wholesale services. You know, I think, first of all, credit where credit's due. I think the folks at PCCW and Colt who kicked this initiative off and demonstrated in the first instance that we could use blockchain to automate settlement for carrier voice services was a big sort of you know, aha moment for me. I think that was demonstrated at one of the previous GLF meetings. You know, in BT, we are looking at blockchain in a research and development context, and trying to look at ways in which we can leverage the blockchain technology and innovation in that space to drive improvements in the things, the way that we run our business in multifaceted areas across BT. This was not one of them. It is now, you know, and I think that's a really good thing that, you know, from a wholesale industry perspective, that we've got an initiative that's looking at how we reduce complexity between carriers, reduce the cost involved in settling between each other, but also, you know, leveraging this very innovative space, this very innovative technology to do that. As an example of how, you know, innovation in technology can really help to change what is a very traditional and quite sort of legacy business. So I think there are two elements to it from my perspective, and it's not necessarily about blockchain, right? I mean, blockchain is sexy. We all love to talk about it. Blockchain is a technology. From my perspective and from a BT standpoint, the interest really is in how we reduce the complexity that exists in the carrier trading space, reduce the cost attached to that. And it may be that, you know, I think the proof of concept has proven that blockchain can potentially help to reduce that complexity. It's just a technology, though. And I think it's important, and I'm sure my colleagues will realise and recognise also that what we have proven through this proof of concept is that the technology can work. I think there's still quite a bit of work required to understand how we you know, govern or implement that technology across the industry. And that's an important point that Mark made at the beginning, which is that, okay, the technology was proven between two carriers, PCCW and Colt. We've now extended that and proven it can work across 6 carriers, but we will only realise the benefit in terms of, you know, simplification and cost reduction in the industry if and when this is adopted across the entire industry, and that's really the key step in terms of how we take this forward from our perspective.
Thank you. And from Telstra's perspective.
Sure. Hi. So, excuse me. So our CTO office, or Telstra's CTO office back in Australia, had looked at blockchain and what to do with blockchain, about a year ago. And they've kind of said, okay, this is really cool. This is a good looking platform. Not quite sure what we're going to do with it yet. So the purpose of the POC for us was to get involved and get some learning out of that and take some practical experience on utilising blockchain in an industry segment or sector, and then taking that back in and looking at how we can execute that a bit more broadly into our business. And again, purely looking from a digitisation and efficiency and scalability perspective. For me personally, in the voice industry, it's a high volume, low margin business. It is effectively a cash flow business. If you're going to have a cash flow business, you better make sure that the cash is flowing. It's kind of fundamental, but I would say we do get wrapped up quite a lot in disputes and settlements and invalid data, and the cash doesn't flow quite as fast as we would like. So certainly looking at blockchain and how this solution can help us with cash flow and cash flow improvement. And then developing that platform and taking it out a little bit more broadly back into other industry sectors, looking at what we can do with it from an SDN perspective, from an IoT perspective. So the POC for us is really, really important from a learning experience. It's really important for me personally in terms of what we can do and improve efficiency in the voice business. But overall, the benefit is more broadly into the ICT industry, as Mark had pointed out.
Thank you. And Pierre-Louis, from an Orange perspective.
What I like very much in this POC is innovation. In our industry, we are sometimes very slow to have a new innovative initiative, and this, for me, very innovative. And for me, to be very honest, at the beginning of the year, before I discovered this POC, blockchain was a very new concept, and it was explained to me by engineers within Orange, but I said to myself, I need to go back to university to understand what they are saying. It's not for today. Perhaps at the best, it's going to be in 2050, deployed, and I was billions of kilometers away to think that it could apply to our industry. So when I discovered the POC, presented by Louisa and Mark in March in Dubai, I said to myself, wow, an innovation, and it applies to our business, and it's very simple. So apparently complex new solution, simplifying our industry, and it simplifies a lot with the contracts, with the automation, with the execution, with everything, even the best, the crypto money. So I'm dreaming of having crypto money in our industry. And so that's why I liked it and joined the concept, and now I'm very happy, and I encourage anybody here just to join and enlarge the experience we have together.
Thank you. Anything else to add from Mark, from your side?
Arguably, Colt and ourselves are a little bit smaller in scope in terms of our business operations, employee count, and so on than the other colleagues on the panel. And seeing us as an initial bilateral partner is one thing, but to see Telefonica, Orange, Telstra, and BT engaged, excited, and leading and pushing and bringing their entire organizations to bear, for me, that was very promising. And I think that we're onto something, and hopefully we can discuss that a little bit further on the panel. That's the only thing that I would add. I think it's just fantastic. Take a look at the characters of the service providers that were involved, see where they're headed, and look at the unanimous view that the words proof of concept were more than just minimally successful. They were a resounding success. Whether or not we go with this vendor, that vendor, what the structure is, we can talk about a little bit on the panel. But I think we're off to the races, and everyone should get on board.
Great. And the reasons that individually everybody gets seems to be that there's like around two things. There's the current efficiencies in the existing business processes that this could just through automation, digitization can provide huge benefits. But then there are, of course, the future benefits of the new digital services, which potentially are not even possible at the moment because of not having the right settlement frameworks and so forth. If we're looking into moving to something into a production or further investment from you or rest of the industry and so forth, is the main motivation around would it be more around the improvement of current processes through adding efficiency, or is it more kind of for the future that that's where the benefit is, and any kind of development would need to be focusing on the future? Can you separate even the two?
Well, I think from our perspective, we need to achieve the first one. We need to achieve or demonstrate the potential to realise some synergy, to justify that upfront investment in whatever we do and however we take this forward. That is the key immediate driver for this. If we can then on the back of that say, well, we've achieved that synergy or achieved that sort of efficiency in the industry in the way that we interact with one another, and now, by the way, we've got these extra opportunities to extend this to other forms of more innovative trading going forward, then that's great. But I think we've got to walk before we run potentially on this one, and demonstrate how we can leverage this technology and implement it in a way across the industry that we can actually really take out that quite hefty cost that exists between carriers in the way that we bill and settle with one another.
Yeah, we fully agree with this. Yeah. I think that in the short term, basically the way, honestly with you, the way to convince the finance guys to invest in blockchain is efficiencies, agility, and basically costs, OPEX. But our view is that in the middle term, we have to extend or expand this, what we're doing in the voice for other businesses, like roaming. We have in mind roaming, messaging, IoT, and in the long term, probably blockchain will help us, to do things that now were, I don't want to say impossible, but really complex to do. For example, in the case of Telefonica, as you know, we operate in really different countries, like could be the UK or Argentina, okay, with very different GDPs. So we have a market which is clear. There is people sending money from one country to another. They pay a lot of money now in the banks to do so. And this is something, all the financial services between countries in our industry, we can, if we do well this initiative of blockchain, we can simplify a lot this. Okay, just to put you an example that it is not for next year probably, but in the long term, I think that in our industry we have a lot of things, or blockchain will facilitate to do things that now are not really easy to do. Okay.
Any differing views of that?
Not a different view, but I think the way that we consume things is changing. So the Internet of Things, changes how we consume data. Artificial intelligence is now helping to crunch big data. Everything's on demand through the cloud. Networks have to become more secure. So the traditional ways that carriers have provided those services and reconciled and build them has to change as well to accommodate the way in which technology is changing the way we consume. So I think it's a good thing that we're already looking at this before the crunch comes where we have to change. So we're ahead of the curve.
Sure.
Yes, currently for us it's a tool. It's used and seen by our teams as tool. So next steps is to enlarge the number of customers, carriers. Also, as it was said, to extend it to the line of products that are settled by this. The roaming, the IoT is very important. But also we need to transform this tool into business benefits, because currently we need just to think about how it will bring us business benefits and convince our financial officers and so on. So really, we have to transform it from a tool until enlarge business benefits.
That was me.
Yeah.
You wanted to say something?
Sorry. Hey, I think we've kind of got to do both. I think, looking at the way we as an industry develop products and take products and services to market, I'd say that we need to quickly accelerate the proof of concept and validate that it works well. Develop it out a little bit further in terms of working within the voice industry, but very quickly go into the other industries, into the other segments, into SDN, IoT, and start implementing a platform around those solutions. Otherwise, you'll end up in a situation where some of those solutions will be developed, and we'll start to hard code some programs around those, and then we'll go, hey, blockchain's really cool, and we'll try and reverse engineer it back in, and I think we'll find that will be really difficult. So my recommendation is we run and walk. I don't know how you do that, Damien. It seems to me to be what we would need to do to really embed this across our industry.
So maybe let me just take half a step back and allow some of the audience to get a feel for what's taking place in the room in the GLF on Monday. We had, Jussi, you would know better than me, how many carriers did we have in the room on Monday?
28.
28. So we had 28 service providers in the room, and you were asking effectively what was the motivating event for each one. And to be honest, out of the 28 service providers, there were probably 28 different views and opinions and 28 different motivating events in order to get there. And yet, there was a unanimous view that the industry, through the GLF, should continue driving this objective forward. And so your question about is it cost reduction or is it innovation or this and that, probably based upon what we saw in the room on Monday, all of the above. Mm-hmm. And for each one, the motivating event is probably a different factor or component, and each one in their different organizations, in order to move it forward, will need to prove different types of cases to their finance teams or to their management teams, whatever the case may be. The next step for us as an industry, as we agreed at the GLF, is to actually sit down more methodically, not just at a senior level, but with the teams that have been involved, and Louisa has been very effective in leading a lot of different service providers and their working groups in order to make sure that things are moving forward and to hash out what can be the construct, what is the right structure that the industry needs in order to feed off of the technology providers, whether it be Clear and Diffitech, who have been involved with us up until now, or perhaps others, and open up the opportunity to deliver technology into the industry and to assure that the industry is staying innovative, flexible, and commercially smart in getting to these on-demand systems. And I think less important to us is the individual motivating events for each carrier, but how can this be a unifying value that will allow us to go to a more dynamic settlement environment that will facilitate more creativity in and amongst the carriers than we've had up until now?
On following on that, this is now the multilateral phase of the POC was completed. You mentioned that it was a resounding success, and I think probably everybody agrees that it proved what it was set out to prove. But what would then be the next things? What else needs to be demonstrated from a technology perspective, for instance, before it can be realistically discussed that we are starting to move our actual settlement into this new framework, into this new platform? Any views on that? What else do you need to see? Mark?
Sorry to keep talking, but I'll tell you, the answer is, you just asked a question that I think carriers fall into, which is what is the definitive 5 nines response? And actually what we're doing here is going into a software-based construct which says let's start to roll it out, reshape, and make sure that we as an industry are comfortable with it, and then continuously improve it. And so from my point of view, what I just described in the previous sentence, which is assure that we have the framework that facilitates that flexibility, is the key. If we start to focus in what will make it perfect before we adopt it, I don't think that we'll succeed as a community to adopt, and then we will set ourselves back.
And can I just add to that?
Please.
I think the type of technology or the type of distributed ledger that we use is less important than the business problems we're solving. Yeah. And that's really the whole point, and I think I agree absolutely with Mark. It's the framework and it's how we work together to collectively solve that issue that we're all facing in terms of manual processing. Yep. and looking to solve for how we reconcile the future demands on our networks.
Any further thoughts on that from Orange or Telstra's side in terms of?
I agree with Louisa. I think we've demonstrated the technology works, absolutely. I think, and having been, in a session with some carriers, particularly on the settlement side earlier in the week, we've got a lot more education to do on what it can do, and we do need to set some parameters around what it should and what it shouldn't do, and then just put it into the market. If I can even see some of the feedback I've been getting from some of my team is exactly that. looking for the nirvana solution. It must meet this criteria, this criteria, this criteria, and this criteria, and it was actually 15 of them that would require God knows how much CapEx from an IT department. So if we do kind of look for a perfect solution, we will struggle. So I'd say we take a minimum viable product, put it into the market, and then put some commercials around that makes it compelling for our industry to adopt.
But how would you, this was obviously, as Mark said, discussed around the GLF context a lot, but how do you then effectively solve the puzzle in terms of we have organizations with stakeholders who want that list of 15 ticks before they can commit, and we know that that's not necessarily possible. How do we scale it? How do we actually engage and move this forward? Is that, can anyone kind of like unpack that thinking currently where we are?
Yeah, if I look at the list, some of them were really around in fact the team had taken a nirvana approach, right? So I actually want this product, I want this blockchain to do everything, and I want it to replicate and replace everything I've got now. And then a little bit more, and I think that's a little unrealistic in the interim, right? And I think in there is an education for us. You know, if you go to your team and say, blockchain, here it is, here's the POC, here's the results, what do you think? Then they'll give you the wish list, and I think we need as an industry kind of set some guardrails around what we want to do with blockchain in this next phase of the POC or beyond this POC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any thoughts in terms of, Pierre-Louis, maybe from your side, in terms of how do we ensure there's a sort of alignment within the industry that this is the sort of right thing to do? What are the key elements, the key stakeholders, for instance, that we need to get behind?
I don't have the answers, in fact, but for us, again, it brings an innovation and a tool to our industry, for the voice industry, which is not the newest one. So for me, as a short term, it brings a lot of simplification, which I will use the energy of my team just to think about new services. And again, we need to transform it into much wider business benefits for us, and we need to think about it and to bring the answers. We discussed it on Monday, and at least it forces us to, I would say, think about being more innovative in our industry, and I like it very much.
Just to add something, you know, regarding this, I think that as next steps, it is really important that we keep this simple for others to join, okay? Because of course, when you're the first one or one of the first one, it was more difficult, to start with something. But we have to try, as let's say, really, I don't care if it is a consortium or call it as you want, but that make it really simple for this to happen and for others to join is a key element in this project, So far, it was easier than what I thought at the beginning, honestly.
Easier than thought. So in terms of the POC and the results that can we comfortably say that we are much closer to a production environment? Are we closer than you originally thought that we might be before starting this journey?
I think what we've got is a proven technology, right? We've run between 6 carriers a proof of concept that has resulted in us sitting here today confident that we can settle, traditional carrier transactions on the blockchain. That's what we've got. And I think one of the reasons for me proactively involving BT at this early stage, in terms of the second phase of the proof of concept, was to win over people within BT. The teams that are involved in managing this complexity every day of the week. And I think what's really positive is we've come out of that as a business believing, obviously, I had my views around the synergy and the cost optimization potential here, but then at the same time what you want is that the people in the business who manage these processes also see the opportunity and see what this can do in terms of making their lives easier. And I think we've certainly, as a business, come away with that perspective. But it is just a technology, and I think the key thing is it could be blockchain. It is blockchain, but it could be something else. You know, we now need to have the construct around how this would actually operate in an industry context, and I think it is crucial ultimately, to the point that was made here, everyone in the industry has to get on board, because if this becomes a bit of a cottage industry in terms of settlement between a few carriers in the industry, we will never realise the real benefit. So ultimately, it has to become something that the entire industry gets behind.
Yeah. Any further thoughts on that?
If I look at it from a settlements perspective back into the voice business, absolutely, we've demonstrated the technology works and has some value. There's obviously, speaking with Claire, there's more coding that we need to do. It kind of, we've demonstrated the POC, but now we need to go in and recode it a little bit so it helps us a bit better with fraud management, helps us a bit better with different classes, helps us a little bit better with some complex deals and shortfalls on complex deals. So there's a little bit more development to do just into the voice segment to really get it firing. And I think if you do that, you can kind of start to have a parallel system that does the blockchain settlement from a complex perspective, and then your traditional as more carriers come on. And I think that will provide the framework to demonstrate that it's got more value outside of that voice settlements framework. Just a little bit more to do for us.
Maybe, I don't know if there's any questions from audience we'll take at this stage. If not, what I would maybe ask every panelist, as we're nearing towards the end, but just take a couple of minutes. So everybody now who's sitting on this panel at the moment, what's your estimation is that when will you settle with one another the first actual live transaction, whatever the use case, whether it's voice data, whatever, when is the first transaction live going to happen on a DLT platform? Maybe Pierre-Louis will start from
next GLF, March 2019.
March 2019.
We need to have aggressive objectives, you know, so next year.
Okay, next year.
Yeah, same thing. And as you know, we have a lot of relationship with Orange, probably one of the most important routes, voice routes in the world, and we are working with you to try to do this, and yeah, I think that next year is realistic. Mm-hmm.
It's realistic. Any other thoughts, Mark?
I'll give a little bit of a summary, if you don't mind, before I give the forecast. And the summary is that we were actually at this event 1 year ago, 12 months, which in our time frame is not a long time, when we first just introduced the topic generally. And at that point, Carl Grivner and myself had a handshake about the POC. And in less than 12 months, look at what we've achieved. From just an initial introduction made to us by a professor from Imperial College about blockchain and what impact can be on the industry, to the point now where we concluded a proof of concept with tens of millions of CDRs demonstrating that instead of settlement taking place over a month to 3 months' time, it can take place in 2 to 5 minutes. This is a huge achievement in our industry in this period of time. And we used voice as a use case, even though the initial intent by Colt and ourselves was to focus on bandwidth on demand. We fell back to voice primarily because it was easy, it was two-dimensional. But exactly what Mr. Sullivan here is describing is that as soon as we've got that base piece, then it becomes interesting and easier to do all sorts of dynamic other developments in order to improve upon it. And that's why next week some of us will be demonstrating at the MEF a bandwidth on demand approach to blockchain as well. In other words, it's already evolving at the POC stage. In terms of production, you asked if we're ready for production. I'm not a software guy, not a hardware guy, and so I'm not going to be the one to tell you. I'll let my team work through it. As I said before, the first step for us, are we ready for production and to go in? I think, yes, that makes sense. But we first have to take a step back commercially, which we've agreed to do at the GLF within the next 60 days. And that will be intensive and probably with even more than 28 opinions in the room. And we'll have to figure out, can we corral the industry to go to the next step? Assuming we can, then I'm with Pierre-Louis. I believe that we'll be able to get to production very quickly and start to have instances of bilateral carrier settlements through this environment to start to create the mass in the industry to facilitate it. I can't tell you now if it's going to be Ethereum-based or Hyperledger-based, this vendor, that vendor, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. First, let's get to the construct, shake hands, start to build the parameters, get that baseline, then move things forward. And we've demonstrated already as an industry that we can collaborate, small carrier and large, and deliver the opportunity. So I'm optimistic that by the time we sit here in 12 months, hopefully we'll be able to report to everyone's success. It does depend on the industry getting on board to some extent. And I hope that this panel is helpful to push that message across.
Thank you, Mark. And views from John?
So for us, we would like to work with the partners up here for the remainder of this year, collect a little bit more data. I don't feel we have enough data yet. Then we need to do a little bit of work with our good friends in CSGI, sitting in the back of the room there, to produce a script so we can take the live feed out of our routing platform. And then I think we'll be a little bit ready. I would agree with my colleagues on the left and the right. Probably March next year smells like a good time to start doing live data. But
I said 2019, you're saying March. That's really moving it forward.
I think that we have some very optimistic executives up here on the stage, Jussi.
So Damien, sorry.
Look, I'm no fortune teller, so I'm not going to put a specific month on the launch. But I think we're making good progress. I'm fully aligned with Mark's views, and I think, just to reiterate, I think the key next step is not about the technology. It's about how we implement this in a governance context for the industry, and I think that's the challenge that we've got to work through over the next few months before we get too excited about launch dates. And but anyway, let's see what happens.
Eduardo, you mentioned 2019 already. You are in a more bullish camp of the possibilities that this could prove.
Yes, no. You have to understand that you don't need to put all your traffic through blockchain. Okay, when I say that it is realistic, because this project, and probably is the nicest thing of this project, you can migrate some traffics, the important traffics and the important routes. You can migrate and start working with the blockchain platform and leave the rest for the other time. Okay, so in terms of production, I think that next year, yes, it is really, really realistic for us, and we intend, to put some traffics over this platform. The most important traffics that we have to avoid disputes. Okay, that we're losing a lot of money now, trying to agree and arrange in disputes that with this process, new process, and this with blockchains are not going to exist anymore. Okay.
And Louisa, finally from your side, being probably the sharpest end of the whole project.
Yeah, I'm not going to buck the trend, but I'm not going to go as bullish as March. I'm with Damien. I'm not really a fortune teller, but I think 2019 is realistic. I absolutely agree with the team here that it does depend on the industry coming together and aligning, and assuming we can get to the commercial framework and agree on the governance and how that moves forward, then there's no reason why we can't move it forward quickly. So excellent.
So you hear
and Louisa's in charge, right?
Absolutely. So
that's why we're in good
hands.
hands.
So we all heard it here first, the industry commitment of rolling out a blockchain over 2019. So we will see next year when we are in this, hopefully the same platform here. So I'd like to thank Louisa, Eduardo, Damien, John, Mark, and Pierre-Louis. And I wish you have a successful rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.